Today, we are diving into a landmark legal case out of the Philippines that really forced the justice system to ask a tough question. When a woman who has been abused for years finally kills her abuser, is she a murderer or is she a survivor? This is the story of Genosa, and it's a case that would challenge the very meaning of self-defense. This sentence right here, from the Supreme Court itself, sets the entire stage. Genosa admitted she killed her husband, so this isn't a whodunit. The real mystery the court had to solve was why she did it, and could that why possibly legally justify her actions? All right, let's get right into the facts of the case. On November 18th, 1995, the body of Ben Genosa was found in his home. His wife, Maravik, didn't hide anything. She immediately and openly confessed that she was the one who had killed him. The who was never in question. So the charge she faced was parricide. That's the legal term for killing a close relative, like a spouse. And you have to understand, the stakes were as high as they get. The trial court found her guilty and handed down the death sentence. Her life was literally on the line as the case went to the Supreme Court for automatic review. Now, this is where things get really interesting and, frankly, historic. Maravik's defense team brought something totally new to the table in the Philippines, the battered woman syndrome, or BWS. Their whole argument was that you can't possibly understand what she did on that single night without looking at the decade of violence that came before it. So what exactly is battered woman syndrome? Well, it's not just a fancy term for someone who's been abused. It's a recognized psychological condition. We're talking about a state where repeated, severe abuse fundamentally changes how a person thinks, how they see the world, and especially how they perceive danger. It can lead to a state of what psychologists call learned helplessness. And a key part of BWS is this terrifyingly predictable pattern known as the cycle of violence. It's a three-step nightmare. First, there's the tension-building phase, with smaller incidents where the victim is just trying to keep things calm. But that tension inevitably explodes into an acute battering incident, just brutal, uncontrolled violence. And then, afterward, comes the tranquil or loving phase. He's sorry, he begs for forgiveness, he swears it'll never happen again. And that glimmer of hope is what traps the victim, making her stay until, of course, the tension starts to build all over again. For the defense's argument to hold any water, they had to prove to the court that Maravik was trapped inside this very cycle. So to understand their case, you have to understand the evidence of the abuse she suffered for years and years. And this wasn't just based on her testimony. Look at this. This is documented medical history. The court saw official records showing a pattern of hematomas, contusions, and trauma, year after year after year. It was proof of chronic, escalating violence that even continued while she was pregnant. In her own words, this was her life. She testified that the abuse was constant, happening maybe 3 times a week. It was just a part of her reality, usually whenever her husband came home drunk. And that brings us to that final horrible night. On November 15th, 1995, Ben came home drunk. He dragged Maravik, who was 8 months pregnant at the time, by her neck. He pulled out a blade and told her, "You might as well be killed so nobody would nag me." She fought back, striking him with a metal pipe. Later that night, after he had gone to sleep, she got a gun and she shot him. So this is the absolute core of the legal problem here. The defense argued that the years of nonstop abuse put Maravik in a state where she felt her life was always in imminent danger. But the law, well, the law has a very rigid, very specific definition of self-defense, and the prosecution said her actions just didn't fit. Okay, so let's break down the law. In the Philippines, for a self-defense claim to stick, you have to prove 3 things. But the first one, unlawful aggression, is the big one. It's the absolute foundation. It means there has to be a real, actual attack happening, or at the very least, an imminent threat of one. If you don't have that, you don't have self-defense, period. And this became the million-dollar question. Ben Genosa was asleep, or at the very least, no longer actively attacking his wife when he was killed. So, the court had to ask, if the immediate physical attack is over, can the danger still be considered imminent in the mind of a battered woman? So, what did the Supreme Court decide? This was a huge moment. They had to balance the strict letter of the law against this incredibly complex psychological reality. And their final ruling was, honestly, a masterpiece of legal nuance. First things first, the court said no. This was not complete self-defense. They stuck to the traditional black and white definition. Because Ben's immediate attack had stopped, that critical element of unlawful aggression was gone. So legally speaking, her acts couldn't be fully justified. But, and this is a huge but, the court didn't stop there. In a truly groundbreaking move, they officially acknowledged the reality of battered women's syndrome and the profound psychological damage it causes. They recognized that even if it didn't fit perfectly into the legal box for self-defense, it was real and it mattered. So the court made this really crucial legal distinction. They said BWS wasn't a justifying circumstance, which would have made her act lawful and led to a full acquittal. Instead, they treated it as a mitigating circumstance. What that means is, okay, the act was still unlawful, but her state of mind significantly reduces her guilt, which means she deserves a much lighter sentence. And they got very specific, recognizing two key mitigating factors. First, what they called diminished willpower. The court said the years of abuse created a kind of psychological paralysis that weakened her self-control. And second, passion and obfuscation. Basically, the terror of that final attack triggered an uncontrollable emotional storm that just overwhelmed her ability to reason. So because of these mitigating factors, the death penalty was thrown out completely. Her maximum sentence was dramatically reduced to this number. And because she'd already served a chunk of that time while detained, she was immediately eligible for parole. The story of Genosa, though, is so much bigger than just her sentence. The impact of this case sent ripples through the entire legal system in the Philippines and fundamentally changed how it looks at domestic violence. So here's the bottom line, the big takeaway. The Genosa ruling was a game changer. It essentially told every court in the country that you can no longer look at a single moment of violence in a vacuum. You have to consider the full context, the history of abuse, and the psychological reality from the victim's point of view. And that really leaves us with this big, lingering question. The law loves objective rules, right? Clear lines. But human trauma is messy, it's personal, it's completely subjective. The enduring legacy of People v. Genosa is that it tried to build a bridge across that gap, pushing the legal world to evolve and to try and understand the complex, wounded mind of a victim.